Artillery is a key component of both the Allied offensive and Iraq's defense. CNN's Jim Kim takes a look at the artillery arsenals on both sides.
Artillery is one area on the battlefield where Iraq can top the Allies.
There is a technological advantage that the Allies have over the Iraqis in artillery, but the Iraqis have a numerical advantage.
Saddam Hussein spent a large portion of his military budget on top-of-the-line artillery, much bought from the Soviet Union, some developed at home or purchased elsewhere. Iraq has two primary towed howitzers, a 155mm version and a 130mm version. The maximum range of these guns tops 24 miles, and they fire 5 to 6 rounds per minute. Iraq also builds a self-propelled 210mm gun with a maximum range topping 35 miles. It fires 4 rounds a minute. Iraq's multiple rocket launchers fire a variety of rockets at distances topping 43 miles. The launchers can send up to 32 missiles at once. U.S. frontline guns include 105 and 155mm towed howitzers, which can fire shells a maximum of just over 11 miles. They fire from 3 to 10 rounds per minute. The U.S. self-propelled howitzer has a 203mm cannon and fires shells 15.5 miles. It can fire 2 rounds a minute. The U.S. multiple rocket launcher has a 227mm barrel. It fires missiles over 40 miles with 12 rockets launched in under a minute. U.S. troops say their guns will do better in war despite Iraq's advantages.
Just because you can throw a rock farther than I can, if I can hit you, it makes no difference. I'm going to hit you before you shoot and miss, shoot and miss.
The Allies also claim a strategic advantage over Iraqi gunners.
And what they'll do is they'll put a lot of artillery shells on a wide area and sort of saturate or try to saturate a piece of terrain with artillery shells to accomplish their objectives. The Allies prefer to have much more precision in their artillery.
The Allies will also compensate for their lack of long-range artillery supremacy by close air support, mobility, and better firefinder radar. But there are perhaps twice as many Iraqi artillery pieces in the Kuwait area as Allied, and cutting down that advantage is one of the biggest tasks of the Allies. Jim Kemp, CNN, reporting.
Our coverage of the war in the Gulf continues. I'm Dave Michaels.
I'm Molly McCoy. Stay with CNN.
This is CNN.
Oil fires burning inside Kuwait. I'm Dave Michaels. Our coverage of the war continues.
Hello, everyone. I'm Molly McCoy. The Allied ground offensive to liberate Kuwait is well underway at this hour. Thousands of Allied troops have pushed into Iraqi-occupied Kuwait. You are looking at some pool pictures as Marines from the U.S. 2nd Division launched their offensive into southern Kuwait. The Marines encountered some Iraqi artillery and anti-tank fire as they surged across the border. Initial Allied reports are upbeat, but military officials caution some serious fighting is expected ahead for the Allies. The commander of the operation, General Norman Schwarzkopf, says more than 5,000 Iraqi troops have been taken prisoner. Preliminary reports are that Allied troops have met less than expected resistance from the Iraqis. Pentagon sources say Allied troops have moved quickly and are now just outside of Kuwait City.
CNN's military affairs correspondent, Wolf Blitzer, is standing by at the Pentagon. Wolf, what can you tell us?
Dave, CNN has learned that as of early this morning Washington time, there were 11 U.S. killed in action during this first stage of the ground offensive. But those numbers are based on preliminary early reports, and those numbers will increase as the ground war continues. Initial reports reaching the Pentagon are extremely upbeat. But Defense Secretary Dick Cheney cautions that more serious fighting is expected.
I'm not going to get into the business of predicting timetables. From the very beginning of our military operations in January, we've been very cautious about making projections and predictions, and I want to continue that mood of caution today. The campaign is going very well. I think it's safe to say it's gone better than expected, but this is only the first day. We still have a long ways to go, and I'd rather be cautious than overly optimistic.
British desert rats and French troops are to the west of the huge U.S. Army 7th Corps, moving into Iraq, west of the Republican Guard, Iraq's elite soldiers. So far, there have only been a few initial encounters with the Republican Guard, nothing too major in the words of U.S. sources here. Marines are moving right behind Saudi and possibly Kuwaiti troops south and west of Kuwait City. But as of right now, we are told the capital has not been taken. Still, sources claim that that objective is within sight and could be only a day or two away. That is reportedly also the case involving two other important towns nearby. Sources say the U.S. and other allied forces have spotted large fires in Kuwait City. They suggest that Iraqi soldiers have been torching some buildings. Exactly why, of course, remains unclear. How long will this war last? Informed Pentagon sources insist that based on these initial intelligence reports reaching Washington, it should not take more than a few days to liberate Kuwait, but they caution again that more serious combat is anticipated. There will be setbacks, there will be delays. Early reports in this kind of a situation oftentimes tend to be somewhat optimistic, but the sources are, of course, very optimistic based on these reports. The sources also say the Iraqis appear to have been, quote, totally surprised by the speed and power of the ground offensive. Said one source, quote, they had no idea how fast we would be moving. The sources also say many Iraqi soldiers in Kuwait are, quote, searching for anything white in order to surrender. But some military political officers, Iraqi political officers assigned to various units, are still reportedly executing Iraqi soldiers planning on surrendering. Now, we have just received some videotape, some pool videotape in Atlanta from Kuwait, actual footage from Kuwait. This is footage with the Marine 2nd Division in Kuwait. We see that there is some artillery fire going on. There was an oil fire just briefly, one of these nearly 200 oil wells that have been set on fire allegedly by the Iraqis. The Pentagon has been making a big issue of these oil fires. Here are some more apparent artillery exchanges going on in Kuwait. This video was shot, we are told, earlier today. Initial U.S. and Allied forces moving in. These are troops from the Marine 2nd Division. They have been moving rather speedily, we are told, towards Kuwait City. And as I reported earlier, they are behind Saudi forces and possibly some Kuwaiti forces as well. There's some discrepancy as to whether or not Kuwaitis are actually involved. Here the tanks and armored vehicles are speeding along. Clearly the destination is Kuwait City. When exactly Kuwait City will be liberated remains a point of some discussion. There had been some early reports that that Kuwait City had already been liberated. That, we are told authoritatively here at the Pentagon, is not the case, and indeed officials here at the Pentagon do not believe that Kuwait City will be liberated within a matter of only a few hours. They think it's more like the next day or two. Dave?
Wolf, we've all gotten so used to those military briefings a number of times during the day. Any idea when they're going to get back to another military briefing?
Well, Dave, General Norman Schwarzkopf, the commander of Operation Desert Storm, surprised us this morning with his brief appearance in Riyadh and his very confident, upbeat assessment of what was going on. Yesterday, after Defense Secretary Cheney briefly met with us in this room at the Pentagon, we were told, we were led to believe that there would be a lid, there would be a news embargo for 24 to 48 hours. Obviously, General Schwarzkopf suspended that embargo to report the initial successes. My sense is, and this is by no means any hard information, but based on what we hear here, the next formal U.S. briefing will probably come sometime tomorrow in Riyadh, although no final decision, no firm decisions have been made. But most of the specific details from the U.S. point of view will probably be officially released by CENTCOM, the Central Command, General Norman Schwarzkopf's operation over there, and those briefings will almost certainly be held in Riyadh.
All right, thank you, Wolf Blitzer at the Pentagon. Well, we have more pictures that have just come in now, a video of the ground fighting, so let's take a look at them right now. This is inside Kuwait, and you'll notice very thin line. That's a line of prisoners of war being moved from right to left on your screen. These are all Iraqi prisoners. Let's just watch this video and listen to the natural sound. Again, as you can see here, this is it's almost wall-to-wall prisoners, Iraqi prisoners being moved, one huge long line of prisoners in the Kuwaiti desert. This video just into CNN. We also saw in that video, obviously, an oil well burning in the background. Looks like an anti-aircraft gun of some sort, and some military vehicles abandoned there in the desert. You are seeing these videos at the same time we are. We're all looking at them at the same time. This is all new to us, and as we get this into CNN, we will be presenting them to you. So there you have the latest video into CNN, and as we get them, we will be presenting them on CNN. Right now, let's go to Mali.
Still to come, we'll bring you reaction from throughout the Arab world to this ground offensive. Stay with us. There's been emotional and very negative reaction to the Allied ground offensive in Jordan. CNN's Taylor Henry joins us now from Amman, Jordan, with the latest from there. Taylor?
Molly, Jordanian officials tonight are denying reports that Iraqi Foreign Minister Tariq Aziz stopped over in Amman last night on his way back to Baghdad from failed peace talks in Moscow. Reuters reported Aziz sought Jordanian help in seeking a ceasefire in the war. Jordanians reacted angrily today to reports of the Allied ground offensive in Kuwait. Women and children of various nationalities, mostly Jordanian or Palestinian, held an anti-war demonstration tonight outside the U.S. Embassy in Amman. The group of about 200 waved Iraqi and Palestinian flags, sang Palestinian songs, and chanted anti-American slogans expressing their support for Saddam Hussein. Police in riot gear kept the women and children away from the heavily guarded embassy and blocked the street to traffic. The demonstration was peaceful. The U.S. Embassy issued a warning for Americans in Jordan to exercise extreme caution and stay home, citing reports of violence in several other demonstrations in Amman this morning. A Spanish TV crew trying to talk with people on the streets in central Amman today was reportedly beaten up before police intervened. Television and other news coverage of the ground war is being closely followed by people in coffee shops and places throughout Jordan. Nearly everyone here is keeping a keen eye on the fate of neighboring Iraq's Republican Guard and other ground forces. Jordan's lower house of parliament, meeting in closed session, took up the latest developments and reportedly discussed last night's visit by Aziz. Jordan condemned the Allied ground attack on its Arab-Muslim neighbor and wished Iraq success in the war, but called for renewed efforts at achieving a ceasefire. Jordanian Prime Minister Muhtar Badran said the Gulf crisis has cost Jordan $8 billion so far and warned Israel's occupation of Palestine must be resolved, or else, he said, the Middle East will face war again within 10 years. Joining us now is Rami Curry, a Palestinian Jordanian author. Mr. Curry, thank you for joining us. The PLO's ally, Iraq, appears to face almost certain defeat in this war. What will this do for efforts at solving the Palestinian issue?
Well, I think first you've got to define what you mean by defeat. I think one of the mistakes the Americans are making is focusing narrowly on Kuwait and focusing narrowly on the military equation. In the longer run, what you have to look at is the political aftermath of this conflict. Certainly in the short run, the Palestinians and the PLO are going to face some difficulties because of the drop in remittance income from Palestinians in the Gulf, Arab aid, some loss of credibility internationally. But in the longer run, I think the more powerful force that is going to emerge is that virtually the whole world recognizes now, especially the Western world, the Arab world, the Israelis, they recognize that you must resolve this problem. You cannot have the Palestinian issue unresolved and expect the Middle East to remain stable.
Well, now, PLO Chairman Yasser Arafat has expressed doubt that a victorious West will be willing to negotiate a settlement on the Palestinian issue. What's your opinion? Well,
again, when you say victorious West, you were victorious in Vietnam in checking the Viet Cong entry into the South, but then when the fighting stopped and you went away and you claimed that you had checked them, look what happened afterwards. The political aftermath was a catastrophe for the United States. I think a similar equation may pertain here in the Middle East. After the fighting stops, and I can't really see how the Iraqis single-handedly can defeat the Allies, obviously, so presumably after the fighting stops and Iraq is sent back into Iraq, the political aftermath is going to be very powerful, and the important thing is not to focus on the personality of Saddam Hussein or Iraq as a country, but to ask yourself, the people of the Arab world, how many people in the Arab world today support the Iraqi position against the United States? And the answer to that, I think, is around 75 to 80%.
Well, specifically, what pressures will come to bear on the U.S. to negotiate a settlement?
You'll have several kinds of pressure. One, you'll have pressure from those Arab countries that were with the U.S. in this war and probably will start calling in the credit chips. The second pressure you're going to have is international. You're going to have most of the leaders of the Western world, and including Bush and Baker, have said in the last 6 months, we've got to redouble efforts to solve the Palestine issue. You're also going to have pressure, I think, from within the United States. People will realize that one of the reasons we've had this confrontation for 7 months and this awful war is because of the anger throughout the Arab and Muslim world, the anger about the fact that the Palestinian issue has not been resolved. If it's not resolved, it will come back again and fuel another conflict a few years down the road, and it'll be bigger and bigger every time.
Thank you, Palestinian Jordanian author Rami Curry. Jordan stands by its policy of neutrality in this war. It has condemned Iraq's occupation of Kuwait, but at the same time wants forces from other countries out of the region. And the general reaction in Jordan today to the Allied ground offensive is one of anger and hope that Iraq will somehow emerge victorious. Taylor Henry, CNN, reporting live from Amman.
Egypt, of course, is part of the coalition forces, but not as far as we understand in these initial ground moves. Pat Neal of CNN is in Cairo. Pat.
Well, Egypt is a key player in the coalition. Experts call it the link between Arab and Western forces. And as the ground war roared on today, Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak met with his senior military advisors.
Former military man President Hosni Mubarak said his country's forces are ready for the action.
The Egyptian troops are working with the other forces, with the Arab forces and the other forces to liberate Kuwait. And they are not going for a picnic, of course.
Egypt has played a major role in the Allied coalition, both strategically and diplomatically. 36,000 Egyptian troops are holding defensive lines in Saudi Arabia, and President Mubarak has tried time and time again to get Saddam Hussein to reason. After a series of personal insults by Hussein, Mr. Mubarak's patience, like the Allies' diplomatic effort, ran out.
I cannot work with him. I never trust this man.
Most Egyptians firmly back their president's role. They've seen him emerge a key leader in the Arab world, and their country's stand has been rewarded with the cancellation of much of their debt. But there is opposition, although experts say it is only a small percent. On the first day of the ground war, one group met to protest its escalation.
I think the Egyptian people are against the war, and in the same time against that our army taking part in this war.
Their participation in the sit-in was under a watchful eye because Egypt is under a state of emergency. The Kuwaitis who live in exile in Cairo are thankful for the role their Arab brothers are playing in their freedom.
It's natural to see the Kuwaiti, not only the Kuwaiti government, but also to see the Kuwaiti people showing their happiness to see this final phase of the military campaign started early this morning.
Some of the estimated 30,000 Kuwaitis here proudly gathered around their embassy. Many wanted to make sure the news of the start of a ground war was true. They see it as a step closer to home.
I'm going to kiss the land of Kuwait.
Egyptians who worked in Kuwait also went to the embassy, eager to fill out the proper papers for a return to their jobs. 2 million Egyptians worked in Iraq and Kuwait before the war, and their paychecks were the #1 source of revenue for this country.
After liberation of Kuwait, of course, all people who were working there will come back again.
The Kuwaitis say they have learned from their crisis.
The most important lesson for the Kuwaitis is how they should get together in the future, how to defend their country, and how to be very careful in dealing with other nations, other people.
Egypt has one of the largest Kuwaiti communities, and the start of a ground war raised both hopes and fears among them. Fears for their countrymen left inside Kuwait, and hopes that all of them may be returning home soon. Pat.
Thank you. Pat Neal reporting live from Cairo today. We will be taking you live to Baghdad when we come back. CNN's Christiane Amanpour is standing by live with more on activity in Baghdad. We do remind you that her report is being monitored by Iraqi officials. Hello, Christiane.
Molly, I was just about to report to you that all was quiet here in Baghdad, that there had been no military activity in this city over, in the course of today. But in the last few minutes, about 2 minutes ago, there was a massive concussion. We felt the walls shake and the windows rattle behind us. We've been hearing air raid sirens going off throughout the course of the day, but nothing much except for anti-aircraft artillery fire going up in response. As I say, those warnings went off starting in the morning. It's fairly unusual for that to happen during the daytime. But as I say, the latest thing we've had here was a huge explosion, at least a concussion that we heard and felt about 5 minutes ago. Now, as for President Saddam Hussein today, we have received a tape that we're told was shot today of President Saddam Hussein chairing a meeting of the ruling Revolutionary Command Council. We weren't given details of what was discussed at the meeting. This tape shot by Iraqi television. Meantime, Baghdad radio today has repeatedly played the president's morning message. It was a short, emotional, impassioned appeal to the Iraqis and to the Iraqi forces to resist the ground offensive by whatever means possible. Now today, the streets of Baghdad earlier this morning and this afternoon were busy. People going about their daily business, as I say, some going about their business in the midst of air raid warnings, and CNN's Peter Arnett was out on the streets for reaction.
At some times, the war seemed near Baghdad. Air raid alerts signaled the appearance in the distant skies of multinational aircraft that have bombed the capital every day for nearly 5 weeks. But in fact, there has been little bombing in Baghdad today. The action is much further away, in southern Iraq and in Kuwait. Baghdad was actually at its busiest since the war began January 17th. People lined up for essentials such as kerosene for lanterns and cookers, a product still reasonably priced at around $1 a gallon. Kerosene lines straggle all over the city. The Baghdad bus terminal was thriving, with travelers coming to and from the capital. And shoeshine boys were doing a brisk business. An air of normalcy that seemed bizarre under the circumstances, a major land war in progress just over 400 miles away.
The calmness of Baghdad is deceptive. Part of it is a resignation to war and its calamities.
Many veterans had gathered at a downtown coffee shop, passing the time by playing dominoes as they discussed the ground war. All said they had tuned to early morning broadcasts of the Voice of America, the BBC, and other broadcasts from neighboring countries, and were aware of developments. Few seemed to doubt that the odds against the Iraqi forces were almost insurmountable, but that this battle wouldn't be the end of Iraqi power.
We will try again. If we are defeated now, we will try again and again and again.
Even though President Saddam Hussein had made a radio broadcast late morning, few in the city had heard about it. Saddam Hussein's short, emotional speech was a rallying call to his people and military to resist by any means. He called the ground war a betrayal.
They betrayed everybody. But God Almighty, Allah, is stronger than everyone. And he is the only one who is always watching, capable of everything, the Almighty. And he will put an end to their invasion.
It was the second appeal by Saddam Hussein to his people in 2 days. Iraqis we talked to felt that the ground war was inevitable, and some felt defeat was just as inevitable.
It's a war, and I'm with you. We cannot fight 29 government, and with this force, with this technology, with this very arms, and about 730,000 army in the Arab island. But everything we can only to hurt you some.
Baghdad functioned normally as a capital throughout the long Iran-Iraq war, even when hundreds of thousands were engaged in major battles just a few hundred miles away. But all we have met agree that this much more destructive war will have far greater short and long impacts on society. Peter Arnett, CNN, Baghdad.
Now, Iraqi military communiques that have been coming out of here today take almost all the reports, the various reports we've been hearing of Allied successes, and refute them. They say that the Iraqi forces are repelling the Allied ground offensive. They report incursions by French and British forces into Iraq. They deny that. They deny the reports also of massive numbers of Iraqi soldiers either surrendering or being captured. I'm Christiane Amanpour, CNN, reporting live from Baghdad.
Thank you, Christiane. Our coverage of the war in the Gulf continues after this. Iraq fired a Scud missile at Riyadh today. 2 U.S. Patriot missiles fired to intercept the Scud. One Patriot appeared to hit the incoming missile, causing it to explode. The all-clear was given a short time later. U.S. military officials in the Saudi capital say the Allied ground offensive against Iraq is having early success.
Still to come, we'll be talking with an expert on the Iraqi war machine. Stay with CNN.
This is CNN.
Early reports from the ground war are guardedly optimistic. The Allies report taking more than 5,000 Iraqi prisoners in just the first 10 hours of the ground war. And Pentagon sources say some Iraqi units are scrambling to find white material to surrender with. Pentagon officials say Allied troops have had few initial encounters with the Republican Guard troops, and they report that 11 U.S. killed in action in the first stage of the ground war. British and French forces are moving into Iraq itself, and coalition troops in Kuwait are reported to be on the outskirts of Kuwait City. But the U.S. commander of Operation Desert Storm warns that some serious fighting is expected.
10 hours into this ground offensive, more than 5,500 prisoners have been captured. And we received reports of many hundreds more north of our positions with white surrender flags.
Friendly casualties have been extremely light. As a matter of fact, remarkably light. So far, the offensive is progressing with dramatic success. The troops are doing a great job, but I would not be honest with you if I didn't remind you that this is the very early stages. We are a little more than 12 hours into this offensive, and the war is not over yet.
Iraqi President Saddam Hussein is still defiant. He said in a radio address today that Iraq will emerge triumphant from the battle.
They betrayed everybody, but God Almighty, Allah, is stronger than everyone, and He is the only one who is always watching, capable of everything, the Almighty. And He will put an end to their invasion and will give them disgrace and frustration, and they will be defeated and vanquished, these treacherous betrayers.
As we told you, 2 Patriot missiles poured into the sky over Riyadh a short while ago to meet incoming Iraqi Scuds, which apparently exploded over the Saudi capital.
Joining us now from London to talk about the Iraqi war machine and projections after the war is an expert on Iraq's armed forces, Dilip Hiro. We welcome you to CNN. From your advanced knowledge of the Iraqi military, do you think they are still ready and able to fight on? Do you think they have any idea of what the Allied offensive has amounted to so far?
I think it's worth remembering what happened when the air war started on 17th of January. Within 12 hours, we were told by the Pentagon sources that all the Iraqi aircraft had been destroyed on the ground. And of course, we found 2 days later on that in all 11 of the 700 Iraqi aircraft had been destroyed. I'm repeating this simply to say one has to accept these statements by the Pentagon with a great pinch of salt. You know, history tends to repeat itself. As far as the Iraqi forces are concerned, according to U.S. reports themselves, there were 540,000 Iraqis dug into Kuwait. Even if you allow for the attrition because of the bombing and so on, I would expect that there are probably still 450,000 Iraqis into Kuwait. And the war has hardly begun, so it's too early to say whether they are going to fight or not fight, or whether the American side will win within the next 2 or 3 hours.
There has been...
I'm sorry, 2 or 3 days, I'm sorry.
There has been a lot said about the Allied strategy. What do you think the Iraqi strategy is?
I think the Iraq has always seen this war in 3 parts: the air war, the ground war, and the political aspect of these 2 wars. And of course, they had no intention of engaging the Americans in the air. As for the ground is concerned, certainly this is where they have a strong cards, and they will be engaging the Americans on the ground. Their cards are that A, they know the terrain, B, that they have actual experience of fighting in this kind of a terrain against the Iranians for 6 years. I'm not saying Iranians are the same as the Americans. There's a big difference. It's still, and they have supply lines which are much shorter than the ones the Americans have. Of course, one could argue that the Americans would cut off their supply lines, so we have to wait and see how that part of the offensive goes. Then finally, of course, they have the chemical weapons, and they have always said, the Iraqis have said, we will not be the first one to use chemical weapons, but they could argue, since the Americans have used napalm, the Iraqis could say napalm is a chemical weapon, and then they might use chemical weapons.
Would you think that the Republican Guards would be the first to use those chemical weapons when the Allies encounter them?
I think it depends. You see, again, if one goes by what happened when the Iraqis are fighting the Iranians, that they used chemical weapons only in extreme situations when they had no other choice but to use them. One. And secondly, in that particular deployment, the Republican Guards, or what then called presidential guards, they have the most experience. So I expect that if they are pushed against this offensive from the American side, then they are likely to use them. And of course, finally, we have to remember that the Iraqis do have access to 850 oil wells in Kuwait. In fact, if again the Pentagon reports are true, then they have already burnt about 130 of these oil wells. They could use them again, oil as a military weapon.
Tell us again, though, about how that is a military weapon. Is it smoke? Is it fire? What is it?
I think the oil can be used, one, to fill in the trenches which are supposed to act as the tank traps, which are along the southern border, which is the Kuwaiti-Saudi border. And if that is these trenches are set alight, then of course the oil well should keep on supplying oil so that that wall of fire will be continuous. Secondly, of course, oil can be used to create a slick. Now, we still don't know how, if the Americans claim their troops are on the outskirts of Kuwait City, it would be interesting to know how they got there. Maybe these are commando paratroopers who have landed there, or did the U.S. use the Marines? If they used the Marines, then I think one would like to know why the Iraqis did not use oil to create a slick, which they had previously planned to do. So, but in any case, the use of oil as a weapon is something we have to look out for.
All right, Dilip Hiro, an expert on the Iraqi military, joining us from London. We thank him for his views, Dave.
When our coverage of the war continues, we'll be talking to the Saudi ambassador to the United Nations. Stay with us. Joining us now to talk about the ground war in the Gulf is the Saudi Arabian ambassador to the United Nations, Samir Shihabi. Mr. Shihabi, welcome to our news.
Thank you.
From the early information that you're getting, how do you see the ground war going?
Well, I see it, very positively, really. I think that it's going on very well as far as the information we have got so far. Of course, one has to be conservative in his estimates the first 1 or 2 days, but everything should be positive, I am sure, and things should be accomplished on time, if not earlier.
So many of the initial reports, the initial report that we received in the very short briefing by General Schwarzkopf, everything seemed pretty positive and they were moving faster than possibly they had expected. Are you surprised by that?
No, I'm not surprised. I'm glad about that, because the sooner it is finished, the better for everybody.
Tell me, how do you see it finishing? What do you expect to come out of this?
Militarily, I think we will liberate Kuwait, I hope, as quickly as we can, and probably earlier than is planned. But I hope everything will go on plan. Later on, then we shall have to face, of course, the rest of the operation, which is non-military.
I want to ask you about that, but yesterday we were getting reports of alleged atrocities taking place of Iraqi troops to the Kuwaiti people. What do you expect to find when Kuwait City and Kuwait is taken?
Well, certainly this must be one of the reasons why the Allied forces should be trying their best to finish it as early as possible, because it seems that there are no bounds to the limits to which the Iraqi regime, under the instructions of President Hussein, are ready to commit atrocities and scorched earth, not only against Kuwait, but against the whole world. The burning of the oil fields, this is an ecological crime against the whole area. It is not against Kuwait only. The whole area will suffer from it. The oil spill, the whole area will suffer from it. The world will suffer from it. These are crimes, that go beyond what human comprehension would accept at this time and in the present age.
Before we leave, just one quick question. Can you see Iraq continuing after the war with Saddam Hussein as still the leader?
Well, this is up to the Iraqis to decide if they want to cooperate with the rest of the area comfortably. I think they should find their own way, but this is nothing that we can decide. We will decide how to cooperate with Iraq and by whom Iraq is ruled after the military operation is finished, and we look into settling the other problems.
Samir Shihabi, Saudi ambassador to the United Nations, thank you for being with us. Molly.
Thank you.
Still to come, we'll talk live with two Americans with loved ones in the Gulf. Stay with us.
We want to take a look at some more video that we have received from the fighting theater. This is in Kuwait. deep in Kuwait in the initial stages of the ground war of Desert Storm. What we're looking at are troops from the 2nd U.S. Marine Division as they entered Kuwait. A lot of heavy vehicle and equipment being moved here in the initial stages. We've been receiving this video throughout the day, and this is some of the newer video we've looked at. In the past video we have seen prisoners of war, Iraqi prisoners of war, that were picked up by the 2nd Marines. You can see a lot of heavy equipment being taken to the war zone. These, of course, are U.S. Marines of the 2nd Marine Division. Several Marines right now talk about their experience in Kuwait.
Everybody okay? Yeah. Close to the beach, it was taken, I think it was taken far. The next thing I know, our left wheel axle hit a mine and it blew up the back of the vehicle.
Can you describe what it was like inside the vehicle?
I'm not really sure because I think I was unconscious. The next thing I knew, I was running and I just fell down on the deck and my head was hurting extremely terrible. And next thing I knew, I was sitting in the medical vehicle getting attention, and that's all I knew. I'm not sure what went on after that. We were the 3rd vehicle from the convoy, and I left wheel axle, I guess by the heavy load we was carrying, it pressed into the deck real hard and it ignited the mine.
And you must feel fortunate that it wasn't worse than that.
Yes, I'm very fortunate. It's scary. It was a scary feeling, and I just finished stopped shaking a few minutes ago.
Were the first hours of the assault what you had anticipated?
No, not really. I expected them to have more artillery. I expected more incoming, and we really didn't see any.
What do you think of the Iraqi forces so far?
I think we beat them up pretty bad with the air war. I think they're probably pretty demoralized right now, but I don't want to underestimate them. I mean, they've still got plenty of weapons, but the weapons systems they can use on us.
And your thoughts on standing here safe and sound in Kuwait?
I don't really know how safe and sound this is, but...
so far?
Yeah, so far. I guess this is what I get paid to do, so I guess I'm doing it.
So far, it seems to have gone pretty well our way. Of course, initial indications are sometimes difficult to rely on, but as you've seen out here, we've taken a number of prisoners. In fact, estimates right now are certainly into the hundreds. Our units have met with some resistance, but we've encountered those, engaged the enemy, and continue to push forward.
Right now, I feel sorry for the people that are remaining on the enemy side because we're going to wipe them out. It's just a matter of time. It's unfortunate one of our vehicles hit a landmine back there, but luckily nobody was hurt. We're going to walk through the country and liberate Kuwait.
Of course, I've never been to combat before, but I thought it'd be a lot tougher. But then again, it's not over yet either, so I don't know. It's just not as tough as I thought.
What are your thoughts being here in Kuwait?
Ready to go home, just like everybody else. But seeing all those EPWs come over the hill, it's a good sight. And I just hope we see more of them.
Some non-coms and one of their officers, U.S. Marines, a part of the 2nd U.S. Marine Division. In the initial stages, the fighting in Kuwait. The video just reaching CNN. When we get more, we'll be showing it to you.
And our coverage continues. Please stay with us.